Hello, everybody. Welcome to the official. We're back after a 1 month hiatus. The Tracy Show. I have a guest here who I will let him introduce himself here in just a moment. Um, I hear background again, so uh, just a moment. Okay, so I hear background noise on my own because I put this on my webpage so I could hear it on my webpage. So I'm like, no, let me turn that off. So again, everyone, welcome to the Tracy Show. I'm going to talk about some changes here at the end, but I'm joined by my guest. Let's get some bills paid and get to the interview portion of the show. Hit that subscribe button. I am literally 40 away from 200. This is the closest I have gotten. I was stuck at 150 for like most of last year. So if I could get 40 more people to subscribe to this page, it would be a great thing. Subscribing literally costs you nothing. Um, and you'll get notified when I go live. Support me on Patreon. Support starts at $2 a month, goes all the way up to $15 a month. You can like me on Facebook. That's the shortened bit version. But if you just go to Facebook, type Tracy Media, all one word, you'll be able to find it. Instagram, I am on Instagram. I'm also on Twitch. And you can email me if you have any questions at TRACYMediaLLC.com. I think I have something to take care of. I'm going to be right back, guys. I'm going to take myself down, and I promise I will be right back.
Huh. I don't know if I'm on. Anybody in the chat?
I apologize for that. I left something on the stove, so I had to go take it off. So I am going to let my guest introduce himself.
Okay. I'm Andy Horning. I'm actually running for U.S. Senate here in Indiana. Not the official candidate yet. The convention is in March. We libertarians are not allowed to participate in taxpayer-supported primaries. So unfair, but it works out. In fact, primaries are dumb anyway. I have written a couple of books. The one that I'd like to talk about most is my defense of constitutional rule of law. It's called Relighting the Torch. It's available on Amazon. I've got an audiobook version, print copies, hardcover and paperback, and Kindle edition. And I hope to be talking about some of that as well as my campaign, but mostly my book is kind of important because that's, I think that if I have a job at all, it's to let people know that, that the government is our choice. We have what we choose, and we don't like to think that that's true. But you look at reelection rates, they've gone up, just as, approval rates have gone dramatically down. And you ask people how they vote, and you can see on election day that that is what people say they're doing. And so, we've been voting for this stuff. You look at how long these people stay in office, and, you hear people talking about, I want term limits, but they keep voting for incumbents, and they will angrily defend their choices. But that's changing. I think for the first time ever in my 30 years of doing this, the people who call themselves independent outnumber both the people who call themselves Democrat and Republican pretty dramatically. And people are starting to get sick of the two-party system. You've got people like RFK Jr. who's starting to shake things up and make the whole idea of the two-party system start looking a little bit silly. So, I'd like to discuss that a little bit too. But I've been doing this for about 30 years. I had a column in the Indianapolis Star for a few years as a weekly columnist. I wrote for Indiana Policy Review Foundation. I have sued the government a few times, unsuccessfully. I have held protests, organized protests for decades, and my appeals for liberty and justice for all have clearly not been working. But that's not up to individuals like me. It's up to people who make the choices on election day, and people who are really running the country. And that's the people I want to talk to.
So I did not know you were plugging a book because I prepared myself to talk about your Senate race, but we could do whichever one. I'm like, okay, let me ask him this
That's
question. Let me
fine.
ask him this question. First of all, what is the title of the book?
It's relighting the torch. So if you see if you go to Amazon and you look up relighting the torch, the cover art is Lady Liberty holding a torch with smoke coming out. It's not the flame has gone out, and it's up to us to relight it. And so really the book and the campaign, I'm hoping to kind of go together. I'm hoping to use the book as something like a campaign tool, because unfortunately, um, almost nobody knows. I mean, even people who call themselves constitutional scholars don't know how the Constitution is supposed to work or even what it says. It's shocking how many people call themselves constitutional scholars, but all they know about is court cases. And they've never actually really read with any understanding what the actual words of the Constitution say. And if people did that, they would have an entirely different idea about what our founding fathers gave us. And, these guys were not perfect. We all know that. And, a lot of the people who wrote it started violating it right off the bat. But that isn't the point. The point is that they wrote this thing as a leash on politicians, not us. It was supposed to be a restraint on governing power, not a restraint on us. And we were supposed to be the ones to hold the other end of that leash. It's kind of like, we're supposed to be the politicians are the junkyard dog. We're the ones who own the junkyard and all the stuff in it. And we're supposed to be the ones, really monitoring how all of this stuff happens. Because we have, if nothing else, we have no excuse for I mean, we outnumber our politicians millions to one. We pay all their bills. We do all the work. And we have the power of peaceful revolution. And that is what our founders gave us, if nothing else. I mean, you can argue about the bits of the Constitution you don't like, or we can have discussions about all kinds of things related to the Constitution. But one of the things that's inarguable is that we choose this. And the founders had to fight the global empire at the time, the global superpower, to start a new nation, and they beat them twice. And the way they did it was with distributed government, independent people, and an organized system of self-defense that we lost in 1903. And I think people badly misunderstand how things like I hear people talking all the time about the electoral college, and they say things like, oh, that's to even out the power of the states. No, we were supposed to vote directly for the electors of the electoral college. And if people knew that, if they knew that we were supposed to vote for the people who would ultimately make the choice for president, that would make a big difference in people's minds. We would have choice over who makes these, decisions that can override the popular electorate. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I would go into why it is that our founders distrusted mob rule. But
Yep.
the fact is, they had a great deal of understanding on how people worked, because they were they were frankly sinners themselves, and they knew, very well, that the things that they were creating in terms of government structures needed to be restrained, and we lost that sense entirely.
Now, since we're in the same state, you're running for Senate in Indiana, and I live in Indiana. Oh, and by the way, to everybody, I am going to I see comments in the comment section already. Thank you very much. I'm going to get to the comments and have our guests answer those here in just a bit. So continue to put your comments in the comment section. I promise to get to them and do the best that I can. And remember to share this. Let somebody know to watch this. We need a whole lot of engagement to get what we are getting done. So, I am going. No, I'm not going to assume. Are you running under the Libertarian Party?
I am. Yep.
Okay, okay. So, as a person campaigning for an independent candidate, I do know, or is the Libertarian Party in Indiana, do you all have to gather signatures or no?
No. In fact, this is another, it's unfair, it's unconstitutional that there are different rules for different people depending on, private club membership. And that's what political parties actually are. But libertarian isn't actually even independent. I'm a member of a party, and we have our own set of rules that are distinct from Democrats and Republicans who have their own sets of rules. And we have advantages over like the Green Party or Constitution Party or other parties, and that we have automatic ballot access and we don't have to get petition signatures. So it's, I'm glad that I don't have to go through all of this, but I will also just, I will offer the fact that it's not fair. It's not fair that, that we have different rules for different people. It shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, and they're so distinctively different,
Oh,
especially when
wait.
you're running on for Senate. I believe you had to get 500 signatures in each of the 11 congressional districts, if I'm right.
Correct. Correct.
If you're running for president, it's just 36. Well, I'm just going to say 37,000. I'll just round up.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, audience, getting signatures is not an easy thing to do, but I'll talk about that in a separate video
Yeah.
because I really
It's not just signatures. I mean, you're asking people to put their address and their
phone
signature and a phone
and their
number.
age,
Yeah.
and their address.
And a lot of people, and especially a lot of liberty-minded people, don't like having this stuff on government forms. And so it's not so easy. Plus, it's gotten to be kind of an ugly partisan thing anyway, where a lot of people, if you're not part of their club, they won't sign your form. And I've gone through this. I ran as a Republican before. And in fact, the only election I ever actually won was as a Republican. And it's frustrating that we have, it's so much easier to raise money and to get on the media. I mean, the media doesn't even listen to people who are not, allowed in the primary election. And by the time the primary elections are over, let's face it, a lot of people decide who they're going to vote for in the general election during the primary. You kind of bond yourself to somebody when you support them in the primary election. And by the time the general comes around, you haven't listened to anybody else. You've already made up your mind. And that's very frustrating.
And the thing about Indiana that's so unique, there is a lawsuit that's going on. But gee, I wonder why they're taking so long. I don't know. I mean, gee, you would think, the election's in November, but boy, it seems like they're taking their sweet time. But I'm not here to make accusations. That's not what I do. But
they will probably have it, that they will resolve all of this the Wednesday after Election Day, no doubt. It'll be fine. Swift justice.
And that's the other thing I want to talk about because I don't know if you know I'm a leftist, definitely leftist, proud leftist.
I used to be too. I'm not, and I still understand. I understand the viewpoint, and I actually talk about that in my book as well.
So I usually ask about a series of issues, asking your perspective, and I'm going to do that. But first of all, knowing the race here in Indiana, I'm just going to assume you're running for the soon-to-be governor. I hate to say that man's going to be governor, but he's probably going to be governor. Senator Braun has decided to not run for re-election in the Senate so that he can be governor of Indiana, and that's leaving his seat free.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, because I couldn't remember, because I think Todd Young just got re-elected the last time. So it'll be Braun this time. Okay, so when you made this decision, because like you said, you've been doing this for 30 years, what made you decide to run for that particular office in a state like ours in a race like this?
Well, I got to be one of those things that a lot of people, I think, get wrong is they think you build politics from the ground up. And that's not really how anything works. When I mean, maybe building a business is like that, but politics is all about passion and marketing and um, anger and, tribalism. And it really doesn't have much to do with logic and order. And, you look to see how fast things happen in politics. For instance, when Ross Perot started his own party and, he got, there was a governor elected under the Reform Party. He almost, I mean, if he didn't back out and jump back in and stuff, he might have won that election too. Things can happen fast because you have a loudmouth at the top, and that gets all the media, and it takes the air out of the room for everybody else. And it really is, politics is it's inherently a top down thing. You have kings, you've got ruling class, you've got people that order things from the top down, and we often get it wrong. Where libertarians, and I criticize my own party for this. We tend to put some of our very best candidates in invisible races, kind of low level offices. We have 20 elected libertarians in Indiana. Who knows that? Nobody. And the fact that we win elections, and we keep hearing from the media that libertarians can't win elections, when we had a libertarian briefly in the U.S. House of Representatives, although he was elected as a Republican, but he became a libertarian. We've had them elected to state houses, not in Indiana but in other states, and it's frustrating that we're told that the way politics works is not the way politics works. And it's more like, movie stars, and, we ask movie stars their political opinions, not because they have cogent opinions or that they're well informed, but because they're famous. And, this is a very distinctively top down thing. And, sports figures, celebrities, we trust them more than we do people who have made a study of this their whole life and write about it, write books about it and that kind of stuff. Because it's passion, it's a lot of hate. It's a lot. Basically politics. I mean, if we were angels, we wouldn't have politics. Politics is about human sin. It's about us fighting each other. It's about beating people up, with guns and bombs and missiles. It's about suppressing some people's voices and augmenting others. It's about rewarding friends and punishing enemies. And so it's not like building a coffee shop business. And that's where I think it's a little bit frustrating that we have so many wrong ideas about the way politics works, and a great deal of it is taught in universities these days. And I don't know if it's I don't think it's so much by design today, but it very distinctively was 100 years ago when the I don't mean to be. I'm not going to be jumping on leftist stuff and like so much, but it really was the Fabian socialists 100 and some odd years ago who devised a plan to, instead of doing the bomb throwing stuff that the anarchists were doing, or the more loud stuff like Marx and Engels that were talking about revolution, they talked about taking over the institutions of education. And that was something that was very definitely their plan. And that was then taken over by many other societies, and like the WEF and so on today. So there is a component of intentional misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, um, and that's one of the things that we're seeing today, where you have Republicans banning books that they don't like. You've got Democrats banning entire platforms and banning people from this and that, and that's because there's so much anger and division. It's inherently divisive to have a two-party system, obviously, and you have so much anger and high stakes. This is people's money. It's their livelihood. It's whether their kids are going to go off to war or not. So, I understand why people get agitated and angry about it. I just wish we'd get informed about it and understand who the real enemies are.
Yep, understandable. And everybody, again, I'm going to say this: if you're watching this, put it on your Facebook pages. Link to your pages, and let your friends know to tune in. I promise I'm going to get to the questions in the comment section. I'm trying a new format out where I'm not just clicking up every single comment that comes in. I'm waiting for a specific time. So keep those comments coming in. I promise I will get to them. So here comes the next question. So again, we're in. Was there a portion where you were not living in Indiana?
Yeah, I lived in Texas for a little while, um, and I was born in Indiana. I've lived here most of my life. I until my retirement this last year. I was working for international companies, and so mostly from home. But I did have to travel a lot. But my heart and my home is in mostly in Freedom, Indiana.
Yep. Okay, so because I'm like, I know the name,
Mhm.
and because when I said you were interviewing, a Facebook friend of mine said you ran for office in Indianapolis against Julia Carson. Is
Correct.
that
That
right?
was in
Okay, that was way back.
way
I know.
back. That was when the internet was still steam powered, and yeah, that was 2004.
Yeah, that was 19 years ago. Oh my gosh, time goes by so fast. So, our state is a unique state. I always say we're Texas on steroids because whatever Texas and Florida does, it seems like, well, up here, um, um, it seems like Indiana wants to repeat the same thing. But I want to make sure, I want to ask, let's see, I'm trying to get this question the exact right way. I would like you to talk about, because we don't know who is going to win the Republican primary.
Hmm, it's probably
We
going to
we
be, yeah, it's
we
probably Jim
we
Banks. Yeah.
we know, but it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. I'll put it that way. It's
Yes, yes.
probably gonna be Jim Banks. Yes. Um. Oh, and Theus, that was my glucometer meter making that noise, not my
Uh-oh.
battery. Um.
Okay.
But like I said, Indiana is a unique state, and the Republicans haven't had their primary yet. The Democrats haven't had their primary yet. I don't think, because libertarians don't have a primary at all, right? You just pick
We're not
somebody at
allowed.
convention. Yeah, you're
We're
not
not allowed.
allowed to.
Yeah.
Right, you're not allowed to. So you
And not
just
all
pick a
states have
convention.
primaries. Not all states have primaries. So that, a lot of states pick their candidates by caucus, just the way libertarians do. And I wish other states, I wish Indiana would do that. But
Yeah. So I would like you to talk about what three issues. Well, one, I no. Let me backtrack this question. First question is I will ask is how are you going to communicate to Hoosiers um, that you are the better choice as opposed to the vote blue no matter who Democrats and the let's ban every book Republicans.
yeah, well, it's most of your question is really just how will I communicate with voters at all, um, because we are not allowed in a lot of debates. And there, I will be as a Senate candidate. I will almost certainly be in at least one Senate debate. But the debates are not even really debates anymore. And we really don't have when I ran for mayor of Indianapolis in 1999, we had 5 candidates. We had 45 political forums and debates, 45. And we had 5 candidates at most of them. And that was a vigorous thing where, the media showed up, people showed up, people asked questions, they got in our face, and they asked tough questions. That doesn't happen anymore. And it just doesn't. And I've run for Congress, I've run, for governor, and I actually ran for Senate, also since then. And it's shocking how people are getting more and more partisan, more and more hateful of the other side, and less involved. We don't show up to get, if we showed up and actually, if the Democrats would talk to Republicans and Republicans would talk to Democrats, they would find that there is not the difference between them that there is between the politicians who benefit from our division. I mean, they live on discord. If we didn't fight each other, they would not have much to talk about. I mean, the whole point of politics is basically about disputes and what to do about them. And that's where when people don't talk to each other. And when we don't really listen to facts, we all have our own media we listen to too. I've made it a habit of listening to Democrat media and Republican media and everything I could find, because if you don't understand, that the other side, one of the things I say in my book, in fact, is everybody thinks that they're right and everybody else is wrong. But the only thing that we're all right about is that everybody else is wrong, because all of us are wrong about stuff at least sometimes. And when it comes to politics, especially where we don't even make much effort to try to understand the other side. We do the same thing that a lot of people do in discussions where, you want to, you let somebody talk for a little while, but while they're still talking, you're formulating your answer, and you're trying to come up with a knockdown kind of an argument, just the mic drop thing, where you just kind of angrily walk off the stage. I won. I crushed my opponent. That's BS. I know, that's what I know you're not supposed to talk cuss on the show. But the point is, we are foolish when it comes to who the actual enemies are. Instead of looking at each other as the enemy, we should be looking at who's dividing us against ourselves. We should be trying to understand, what is it that these people are doing to make us think that they are so different. When we look at what they're doing with war, with the Federal Reserve System, with debt, with spending, you can look at the graphs. It's hard to tell who is in charge based on who does what. Like here in Indiana, it's a Republican state. That you can't Republicans can't blame Democrats for anything in this state. And so when we have these
Mm-mm.
gas taxes that keep going up and up and up, and like I live in Owen County, where the roads are horrific. We probably have the worst roads in Indiana, and we
Oh
also
no, I
have
doubt
bad.
that. I seriously doubt that. I think Indianapolis. Oh my gosh, there was
Oh,
one
I
that
lived
was
in
so wide that I'm
I
like,
lived
is
in
this gonna take the
Indianapolis.
street? I mean, literally,
I
they
lived
put
in.
a cone inside the hole,
I know.
inside
I
the
get it.
hole.
I lived in Meridian Park for a while, and we had a couple of houses in Indianapolis that were in areas that had terrible roads. But I live on a dirt road, and the fact that this road used to be paved, and the fact that the way the funding for roads works is they get more money for maintaining dirt roads than they do for asphalt roads. So they tore up the asphalt road, and now I live on a dirt road. And this is so redolent in every part of our politics, where the whole point of having state supported schools was supposed to be that we have the same quality schools in poor areas as that we have in rich areas. That certainly doesn't happen, because in the state constitution, um, it's supposed to be the case that we don't use personal property tax to pay for schools. If you read Article 8 of the Indiana Constitution, it talks about the Common Schools Endowed Fund that has all kinds of forms of funding that we don't use, and personal property tax is not in it. And Article 1, Section 25 of the Indiana Constitution, it says basically, if it's not in here, it's prohibited. And the fact that we have this unjust system of schooling, that was supposed to be equal, but rich people have rich schools, poor people have poor schools, and you'd get that without state funding. And so, the fact that we do this with roads, when I lived in Meridian Park, that it was kind of it was a kind of an up and coming neighborhood in some ways, but it was certainly not like the areas north, where the streets were well attended. They kept the sidewalks nice, and repaired. And where I lived, we had buckling sidewalks, and we had sinkholes in our one of the sewer lines broke. And on 33rd Street, they shut it off because your car would literally go down into this thing. And it's shocking how we have tolerated this, where poor areas have poor services, and you don't need government to do that. That's what, if you're going to let rich people have rich stuff, and that is what happens. We're foolish to think that government is like Robin Hood. It isn't. It never has been. Generally speaking, they take from the middle class and the lower class, and they give to the rich. And you can see this in campaign donations, and you can see it in what the policies we get out of it. The corruption is shocking. And I don't know why we get so partisan about this, because both parties have been caught doing bad things forever. And it's, we think, oh, our party doesn't do it. And yes, it does. And it's embarrassing that we still believe, that our media is right, their media is wrong, our party is right, their party is wrong, when in all the important ways we can see that none of this stuff that we're told is how government works is how it's working at all. It's all bogus.
Mhm. And so at this point of the show, we're gonna get to some of these comments because I promised I would get to them. So we have Brad Lorton. Hello, Brad. Thank you for coming. You state replace it. An incumbent with a challenger who's beholden to the same big money interest is not an improvement.
That's correct. That's true. But that's just it. Who even looks to see where the campaign money comes from? I mean, I can tell you right now in my campaign coffers, I've got $336 was my last report. I am definitely not supported by, the military industrial complex and the scientific industrial elite that Eisenhower warned us about. And so, what was that other question?
Oh, this was about a comment you made previously.
Oh, Charles Beard. I know of Charles Beard. Okay, Brad, I wish you would read my book. I know of Charles Beard and I know his ideology, and I'm kind of guessing what yours is now. So, this is you're kind of making my case for. I don't mean to, kind of get in your grill about this, but you're kind of making my case for me because he is exactly the kind of person that I was talking about early on, who bills themselves as an expert of the Constitution, where my book has the whole Constitution in it with my annotations. You can read my annotations and see whether you agree with them or not, but you really ought to read the actual words of the Constitution, because if you don't, you're going to listen to people who tell you things about the Constitution that are just not true. And, the idea of an economic interpretation of the Constitution is itself it's a misunderstanding of what the Constitution is supposed to be for. And so, if you actually, if you read the Constitution and you understand the whole design, which I try to lay out in my book, this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. The Constitution was a compromise between people who were essentially Democrat, like analogous to Democrats and Republicans today. Even though they did not have those political parties when the Constitution was written and drafted, and we certainly, our founders warned us against political parties very strongly. If you read, Washington's farewell address, he takes great pains to tell us, don't do this. And all of our founders, one of the things I do in my book is I have a lot of quotes from the founders that I think are relevant because they paint a picture of our founders that's way different than what we hear today. And I'm the first to admit they were very flawed men. And, they did a lot of things that are bad, as if we don't do similar things today. We actually have more slaves in the United States today than we had back then. It's just we don't talk about it. And the fact that, we have more slaves in the world than we ever did before. Mauritania and lots of places are fairly open in human slavery. And it's not all sex slave. A lot of it is, same old kind of chattel slavery that we had hundreds of years, thousands of years in every country on the planet. And so the fact that so many people think that there was some golden age somewhere in some country where people were nice to each other, that's foolish. It's never happened. The fact that people have been doing mean things to each other forever is undeniable. And the whole point of the Constitution was kind of written on the understanding that, let's face it, what single kind of entity has ever done more harm to human beings than governments? War, oppression, slavery, genocide. The fact that there is something called democide, where countries they kill their own people by the millions. Pol Pot, 1/4 of his own population, he wiped out 1/4. That is, people don't, we think about, Mao, yeah, he killed more people, maybe, 100 million. Stalin, 20 million. Have Hitler, 10 million. But in terms of percentages, nobody beat Pol Pot. And the idea that our founders had was that we need to keep a lid on this thing because we don't want to be, to think that we're the ruler of the planet. We don't want to have foreign wars every place. And the fact that we've got, so much of that stuff going on that our founders warned us about should make us think twice about the wisdom versus ignorance of our founders versus us.
Now, not that I want to interject, but I do want you to answer this question.
Okay.
Andy, would you support a parliamentarian system? I think that's just a yes or no question.
Nah, not really, because it depends how you define that. Because there are several different parliamentary systems on the planet right now, and they're all different, and they have different shades of, of centralization and distribution of power. And so, it's not that simple. Parliament is, depending on how you define it, it's kind of, we live in a republic where we have a bicameral Congress that is analogous to the parliaments of many nations. And I am definitely in favor of a constitutional design as it's written in the Constitution, just because it's already ours by law. I just wish we would do it. And if we would try it and actually, use the Constitution as it's written with proper understanding of the people who are supposed to be enforcing it, that's us, then I don't think most of us would have problems, because most of the things, like, we're talking about, look, bloody rich folks, the influence of money in politics, that's all our fault. We vote for these people and we reelect them, and there isn't any excuse for that. When we don't look to see where their money comes from, and let's face it, Democrats and Republicans get an awful lot of money from the same financial services groups, the same military contractors. You look to see, like, the ISTA here in Indiana is the biggest lobby in the state, and this is a Republican state. And you look to see where all of this money comes from, where it goes. Why don't we vote like we know how this works?
That is a very good question. And there were some more questions I had to get to, but you said something. No, I'll get to the question and then I'll get to what I want to hit to at the end. Okay.
Can I answer Brad? Brad asked a question that I kind of like to get to, if you don't mind. He's just less than
Okay,
5% of the.
Oh, yeah.
5%.
Okay, so you want this one? Okay, less than 5% of the adult U.S. population voted in the 1788 presidential election.
Yeah. Now,
you want to get to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, because a lot of people think that biomass is how we should run the country, and that, the number of people that make the decision is the determining factor. When, let's be real here, an awful lot of people who vote have no idea who the candidates are, let alone, what they stand for and so on. I mean, you ask your neighbors, how many of them know who their state rep is? How many of them know who the vice president is? And you'll find that, that biomass is not a good way to run a country. We really should be more educated than this. And I would wish that more people did their homework. And I would wish that the number of people who did their homework was greater than the number of people who are not doing their homework and voting anyway. I can't tell you the number of times I have heard, when I'm trying to talk to voters, they would say something like, "Oh, I don't want to talk politics. Oh, I don't care about any of that stuff. I can tell you everything about the Colts. I can tell you about, my favorite movie star, but this politics stuff. But I vote in every election." That makes me crazy. The fact that they don't care, they don't know, they don't want to know, and yet they want to vote. And that's what do we think is good about that?
Okay, so Theus has a good question I want you to answer. And Theus, I promise I'm going to get your question. But Mac, where have you been? I'm so glad that you're here. Not me. I vote Green Party and happy to do it.
That's okay. And if you're left, if you lean left, I would much rather see people vote Green Party, because they seem to be much more principled and behind the actual rhetoric than a lot of people in, well, I'm sensing there are a lot of Democrats. I better watch what I say about Democrats or Republicans for them. And I tried to be.
No, we smashed, we slaughtered them both. We don't care. Oh, I mean, rhetorically only.
Well, let me say, I would like to be in the position of marriage counselor between Democrat and Republican, because if you get a libertarian in the Senate, And suddenly there's a third voice to be heard from. Because right now, let's be clear. Republicans have their caucuses, Democrats have their caucuses, so they have their own little divisions within their party, and they tear each other up from the inside all the time. I've witnessed it. I've been kind of in that melange for quite a while. But the fact that when it comes to important stuff, they act as a block, as if they agree on things when they don't, and they fight each other. And so the Republicans will say the sky is blue, the Democrats will say the sky is orange, just because the Republicans said it was blue. And that kind of fighting has got to stop. And if we can get somebody in the middle who says, "Listen, I'm not part of your game. I'm not doing this." And even though every time I say I'm running as a libertarian, people will say, "Well, who are you going to caucus with?" As if that's what we want. We want to have people that are divided, shirts and skins, Hatfield and McCoy, the North and the South. We shouldn't be thinking like that. And yet we do. And that is represented on every election day, and that is reflected in our government. There isn't any doubt that the government is our avatar. It is, the embodiment of our collective choices. And those collective choices have been, rotten for quite a long time.
And things, I promise I'm gonna get to your question, but I gotta
Okay.
ask this.
Okay.
I want you, and see, this is where it's hard because we think we know who's gonna be the Republican nomination for Senate. No idea for the Democrats. I'm just gonna say the guy from last time that people voted for. Or am I thinking? I was confused with the Secretary of State. Never mind. I confuse it. I confuse the guy that lost to Todd Young to the guy that ran for Secretary of State,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
why I do that. But here is my question: when you're out talking to people, because I'm assuming your campaigning is going to be something that you want to do, what are you hearing, and then what are you saying?
Well, I will be. I got to tell you that I've been talking to a kind of a select group of people. That is to say, people who want to hear from me. And so I've not. I'd love to talk to a broader range of people, but it just hasn't happened yet. And until I'm the official candidate in March, um, my my ability to talk to people across the spectrum is fairly limited. So I should admit that what I am hearing from the people I talk to is probably not really representative of even 50% of the population, because I've been talking to people who are politically agitated, show up to meetings, and I go to like a county meeting, or the Purdue Extension might have meetings about local government or something, and I talk to people, and there are Democrats and Republicans there, but they're all people who take a keen interest in government, and that is not really kind of getting back to what I was saying before about that 5% vote. That's not really representative of everybody, but what I've gathered so far is that people are waking up to the fact that our government is off the rails, and that the debts, the wars, the corruption, and it's just from everybody. It's intolerable. And in fact, I will tell you honestly, I don't like to talk about other candidates, but I will tell you honestly, I do not care for Donald Trump. But one thing that I am grateful for him for is revealing by his presence and his actions and what happened around it, revealing how corrupt our government really is, and the different sets of rules based on which party you're in, and what your position is, and how unfair, unjust, corrupt, and screwed up all of this stuff is. And I'm grateful for that, because what we as voters need more than anything is motivation. We need to get kicked in the rear, so that we understand the importance, the accountability for our votes, and the power of our votes. Because one of the reasons I think it's important for people to understand that we chose this, and that we are the ones who screwed it up, is because that then means concomitantly that we have the power to fix it. All we have to do is change our choices.
Yep. And so now, Thea, as I told you, I would get to your question, and your question is, what is, and this is to you, Andrew, or do you prefer Andy?
It doesn't matter. I've been called
Um,
much worse.
uh, what is your party stance on restorative justice, especially since you made chattel slavery akin to being mean to each other?
No, I didn't. No, I did not. But anyway, actually, restorative justice is actually what we're supposed to be doing in Indiana per our own constitution. So the state constitution is actually in favor of restorative as opposed to punitive justice, and it says so in the state constitution. Now, the federal constitution does not, because most things, even like things like murder and so on, are state level issues and not federal issues. But it depends what you mean. This is where things get sticky, because this becomes a partisan issue when people start talking about restorative versus um, punishment versus whatever. And I'm not going to make any guesses where you're going with this question. I think I know, but I'm not going to hazard a guess, because I'm going to let that question come up separately. But the point is, it is supposed to be restorative justice, and it never was supposed to be punitive, because the fact is that it was known even you know uh, thousands of years ago that it really doesn't work that well. Even capital punishment has got severe limits. I mean, the person you killed is not going to learn any lessons, certainly, and it isn't even that much of a when you're talking about crimes of passion, where everybody knows it's illegal to kill people, but nobody's ever been able to stop murder entirely. It still happens, and it doesn't seem to matter. It's more of a cultural issue, people's respect for life, and how people get along, and connections in local societies. That has more of a determination. In fact, whether you have a father present in the home, whether you have a decent education, these things have a much bigger effect on crime than our system of punishment does. And that's where the idea of restorative justice was supposed to be. You stole something, you pay it back. You break something, you pay to fix it. And that is a sensible thing, because it's justice, in so much as you're not hurting anybody. You're trying to make things whole for both the criminal and the person who was wronged. So I'm totally in favor of restorative justice.
Okay, and here's a question I rarely ask, because usually I go into issues, but since I'm more familiar with the Libertarian Party, am I correct in stating that the Libertarian the Libertarian Party is more in favor of less government?
Oh yes, oh
Okay,
yes.
got it.
Well,
So,
let me define that, because in my book I also try to make this plain. We're not anti-government. It's just that we want to govern the government. We think that of all the things that need to be governed, our government is chief among them, because they're the ones that want a monopoly on violence, after all.
no, where I was going with that question, because as a leftist, my number one issue, without a doubt, is Medicare for all. It's my number one issue, and every libertarian I've talked to so far, which I'm thinking you probably fall into that category, is against it, because they say the government shouldn't be controlling health care.
Well, I worked in healthcare my whole life. That's what I did for my day job. I've got clinical credentials as well as product development, and that was I was working in engineering, education, and in fact, now that I'm retired, I'm going back into clinical work part time, and so that I am very familiar with with the medical business inside and out, and I know how much it should cost to make an ultrasound machine, because I did that. I was involved in the design of software and hardware for medical imaging devices, and the fact that we have socialized healthcare, and we have had for about 150 years, since the creation of the AMA, and the fact that we ended up kind of wiping out large segments of what used to be considered healthcare, and not for all bad reasons. And I'm not even entirely opposed to the way a lot of this happened. But when in World War II, with the wage and price controls, when we tied health insurance to employment, and then when we started getting more involved with the what you can charge for this and what you can charge for that, what is actually healthcare and what is not healthcare, we started making things much more expensive, much more complicated. And just from my selfish viewpoint as a former worker in developing devices, um, I can tell you that we used to have all of the technology here in the United States for ultrasound, for instance, and we lost that, starting in 1990 because there was a shift. It used to be we thought, Europeans had all of the regulations and we were more free to do stuff and we can experiment more. We had more freedom to build things. We can bring a product to market twice as fast. We had higher worker productivity. All that changed, and now we could, just a few years ago, we could bring a product to market twice as fast in Italy as we can in the United States. They have lower worker productivity. We have more regulations than anybody. We have more litigation than anybody. And so when you're looking to see, there are different species of socialization. And I could talk about a lot of them because I've worked with, international companies where, we had offices in Germany, the Netherlands, France, China, Japan, and I'm familiar with all of these systems, and I know their pros and cons. We have just about the worst combination of the sort of the greed of capitalism with the profligate spending and waste of government, and that's all because, let me make the thing really clear. An awful lot of people have this idea that government sold out, and they should, because it is. But Democrats tend to blame corporations for buying government without blaming that our government sold government. So we blame the people who bought it. We don't blame the people who sold it. Whereas Republicans are a little bit the worst, the reverse. So they'll blame, the politicians who sold government, but not the corporations who bought it. And in both cases, it was the power that to reward enemies and punish, reward friends and punish enemies that led to all of this. And it is happening in other systems as well. If you look to see what's happening in the Canadian healthcare system, what was happening in the British health, UK healthcare system, which, my last company was based in Edinburgh, Scotland. I'm very familiar with what they complained about, with their systems. There isn't anybody who's doing it perfectly right now. But, we should at least understand that if we wanted to have the best healthcare possible at the lowest cost, that's a discussion we're not having. We're not even talking about that. If we wanted to do the best by people and make lives longer and healthier, that's a separate discussion. What we do instead is we do the same partisan thing we do with everything else. We say, what's the Democrat solution? No, I want the Republican solution. That's all wrong. What we should be looking at is the holistic view of health is that we eat bad food, we're doing terrible things to our soil. What we're doing, just in terms of basic, lifestyle changes necessary to live longer and healthier. We're not talking about that stuff.
Yep.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to move on to Theus's question
Yeah.
here because he answered the restorative justice question. He states,
Yep.
restorative justice is the sense of reparations, politically charged term, or dismantling a systemic, I can never say that word, racism in society as it affects by legacy descendants of American chattel slavery. Then he goes on to say, ultimately, it took government to end codify slavery for my people, so states' rights and local small governments are terrifying things. Local government tried to cover up Aubrey being murdered. That part is true.
I will not doubt that we still have tremendous problems with racism. And I'm not doubting that, but let's also be real about the slavery that's, like I already said, it's still going on. And who was it that sold these slaves to the traders, to the Arab traders who ended up, bringing slaves? It was Africans themselves who were capturing slaves and selling them. And Africa is still, there's still human slavery in Africa. People, I don't know, we don't talk about Mauritania more, but they only ended official slavery in the 1980s. And they never prosecuted anybody for it for decades after that. And even today, when there is, so much talk about, human trafficking and slavery and stuff in other contexts, we don't put two and two together to see that we're still doing things to each other. And the fact that we talk about the past as if we don't have a present, that's crazy. Why are we doing that? Why are we letting kids be, shipped across borders as sex slaves And we're still just talking about, what happened to other people, by other people a long time ago.
Yep. And finally, Thea says, I appreciate how rational Andy is. His politics are, as they impact minorities and vulnerable groups, are deeply problematic, but at least he is rational, can work where there are overlaps. That was Thea's last thing. So, because I try to keep these interviews under an hour, I'm probably going to go way past that, but I do want to ask a couple more questions about your run, and then you can promote yourself here in just a moment. So we're just going to assume that all the citizens of Indiana go to the poll. You get the nomination at convention because now I understand that the Libertarians don't actually have a primary or don't appear on primary ballots. You have to have a convention. You're nominated at convention. You get the nomination. You win the Senate seat. What piece of legislation would you author?
Okay, well, that's actually in my book too. I've got the last chapter is all about the legislation, mostly nullifying stuff. And a lot of people think nullification is a bad word that only conspiracy theorists ever use. But, our government's nullifying stuff all the time. We have so many laws that are contradicting each other that, whenever a police officer wants to search your trunk, he can find a law somewhere that says, okay, there must be some law that I can get this guy on. And the fact that we have so many laws, the ignorance of the law is clearly, it's unavoidable. Nobody can know all of our laws. And that was supposed to be something that our Constitution avoided also. We were only supposed to have certain jurisdictions where governments were only allowed to have certain laws. And let me just give you a quick example. For instance, in the 18th Amendment was the only time our government ever had the authority to ban the manufacture, sale, or distribution of anything. And it was the manufacture, sale, or distribution of intoxicating liquors. It didn't include the purchase or the consumption of intoxicating liquors. And so they understood that in order for the government to ban the manufacture, sale, and distribution of anything, they had to pass an amendment, and that was the 18th Amendment. When they passed the 21st Amendment and got rid of it, that was the last time our government had any authority to ban the manufacture, sale, or distribution, or consumption, or purchase of anything. And yet we have all of these laws against, marijuana, all of these laws against buying this or buying that, or consuming this or consuming that. We have restrictions on, some things that are far less harmful than the things that are legal. And it makes no sense. But the fact is that all of this is unconstitutional. And if we wanted to be, in a position where we can ban things, and we should, you should not have this kind of cigarette, or, ban menthol cigarettes, whatever you want to do. There is a process for giving government the authority to do that, because constitutions are more about authority than they are about law. And if the government doesn't have the authority to write a law, then that law ought to be null and void. And so an awful lot of what I would want to do, in fact, I have a resolution written in my book to this effect also, that we should be looking at, what are the things where government has just clearly overstepped its authority and it's interfering in things it has no business interfering in, largely, individual human rights being, badly trampled in every sort of respect these days. We should nullify those laws because the government has no authority. That's what, if you read the Ninth Amendment, basically it says that we have all rights that are not specifically taken away in writing. And the 10th Amendment also, concomitantly says, and importantly says, that government has no power that's not specifically granted to it in the writing of the Constitution. And that's similar to Indiana's Article 1, Section 25, that says no law shall be passed the taking effect of which shall be made to depend upon any authority except as provided in this Constitution. So, if you're looking to see what the constitutional design is all about, it's about putting a leash on politics from doing stuff to us that they have no authority doing.
My meter went off again. I'm like, okay. I'm like, stop that. So we got two more comments, guys. I want to thank everybody for their comments. This is probably the most I've ever gotten, and I like this new format, so I'm going to stick with it. So these came up with this one. Nice distortion. We talk about American slavery because we are Americans. Deflecting to other
Oh,
countries is a dodge.
no, we have slavery in America today. We do. And so it's not a dodge. We just don't talk about the slavery we have in America today. And we are the biggest market for sex slaves right now. The United States is the biggest market for human slavery.
Yep. And Mac says, I am suspicious that slavery was also affected by the fact that the societies in Africa that supported slavery were Muslims and that persons who were enslaved were probably tribal animists and or Christians.
That's actually correct. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so this has got another one. He came in right in.
No, you're kind of mixing things up again. So the slavery that you were talking about, recompense for, that was a long time ago. The slavery that we have today, you were not talking about. You were not talking about, paying people back for the lives that are being stolen, that are stolen today. That's not what you were talking about. You were talking about, a long time ago. And so it was very relevant that I brought up that we are not talking about something that's happening right now in our country, right? It's not even a secret anymore. It's pretty well known, and there are some people that are trying to do something about it. But it's a huge problem, and I wish we would give more credence to the people who are trying to bring attention to the human slavery that's taking place today.
No, not final question. Second to last question. I always ask this: if people, first of all, I have a question for you that I don't want to ask on air. So if you can stick around for like maybe two minutes, because
Yeah.
it's either a yes or no question, and then I'll do that. But I want you to talk about finally, um, you know, your maybe your book,
Mhm.
how people can connect to you if they want more information, or how to get a hold of you if they have more questions.
I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. And in fact, I've often put my cell phone out there, and I don't want to do that today because because of spammers and all of that. But I've done that before, and almost nobody ever asks me questions, and I love it. But if you go to horningforsenate.com, I've got a contact page there where you can get a hold of me easily. I'm easy to find on Facebook, Twitter. Um, it's I can give you my email address. I certainly don't mind answering emails. Thefreedomfarm@gmail.com. I live on a little farm in Freedom, Indiana. So thefreedomfarm@gmail.com. You can ask me questions. And while I do, when the campaign gets started, I don't know that I can't always answer everything in a timely fashion because I do answer them all myself. And if I get hundreds of questions, there's only so much I can do. But I will try to answer questions if I get them.
Final question, final remark is going to come from Mac. Mac says, well, the government has the authority to deny the rights of individuals to travel who have an imminent contagious diseases that no treatment because it benefits society, and government has the authority to represent persons who cannot decide for themselves, such as persons in comas.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, my first job in healthcare was in public health. I worked at the arbovirus surveillance unit at the Indiana Board of Health, and so public health is important, but there's much more to discuss than I think we have time for right now. And I would love to talk about it, but that's almost its own show in itself, because we're doing things very badly, including now. Now we know that we were funding bioweapons research. That's not cool. But the fact that government is the only one that can do that, I really have to push back on that because traditionally in the United States we had lots of groups that dealt with this on a much more fair and cheap way. Like voluntary associations, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis, churches. We had lots of people in local communities, and in fact, it used to be the case that if your barn burned down, it was the local community that would build it back up, and we've lost that sense of community where people would look after each other. But like even when I was a kid, my mom would have little ladies' tea things over at the house. It wasn't just meaningless socializing. they actually discussed things that were going on in the neighborhood and how to fix something. Oh, I'll send my husband over to cut their lawn because so and so is sick. We've lost our local culture and our local civility, and I, boy, I wish we would get that back because you have so much function in other countries that are provided. You look even at like very primitive cultures where they don't even have any government services at all, like we think about, and they've got terrible health care. They've got a much stronger sense of helping each other out than we do, and that's a shame.
Okay, I said, well, I'm not going to have Andy answer this question, but I am going to put it up because I have a question for Andy before we go. So, he says, scratch the surface, it always comes out. Ask about income taxes and get what about tax? Both taxes rhetoric fetch. So I don't want you to answer that because I would like to have. I rarely do this where I will invite somebody to come back. It's one of those things I don't do, but if you're willing to come back in probably April,
Sure, I'd be happy to.
yeah, because that time we can spend a little bit more
Sure.
time doing what we need to do. So everybody, thank you so much. I know we have
Thank you.
been gone since like the first week of December. I said no, we're going to take our 1 month hiatus, and it was a long one, but I'm definitely glad that people tuned in. I wasn't sure about this 7:30 time, but I think in terms of the comments I got, this is about the most engagement that I've ever gotten. Um, And so I'm very, very happy. Remember to like this page, share this page. Please share this page. I am so close to 160 subscribers. It's like right there. I'm literally right there after being stuck at 150 for like 90% of 2023. So let's get this channel up. Join us next week as we have another interview from another candidate. And remember, Tuesday, Tuesday, we don't interview candidates. We talk to influencers. It's still the Tracy Show, but we're going to be talking to comics all February long. So tune in for that. That should be special. Remember to like this page, subscribe to this page. If you see this video later, put your comments in the comments section. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a fantastic evening.
Thank you very much.